Hey guys, just read a headline on the Drudge Report. It's one that they've been worried about for a long time. Superbug. They found one in America. It's one that is resistant to the last antibiotic that we had. Obviously, this is just the first one, and I can't remember the name of the antibiotic. It's like Clotzin or Clotzin or something. It's an older antibiotic. It's a harsh antibiotic. It wrecks your kidneys. But this was the last line of defense for infections, and it's been breached now. Uh, and it may not be something you're concerned about. It's certainly not representing the end of the world. I think even the worst case scenarios on this sort of thing is that it's likely to kill, people who are sick, people who go in for treatment. Certainly surgical procedures get a little more dangerous. Cuts get a little more dangerous. But it's not like an epidemic's about to wipe out all of society. It just means that there's going to be a much higher death rate, and actually death for things that we've gotten used to thinking of as commonplace. But it got me to thinking, what's your poison? What are you preparing for? Those of us who are preppers or nominally preppers, we all have this general perception that society's headed for a collapse. It certainly collapsed before with societies that thought they were too powerful and too wealthy and too educated and too smart to collapse. It happened with the ancient Hebrews. It happened with the Babylonians. It happened with the Assyrians. It happened with the Carthaginians, the Romans. France collapsed once. Russia's collapsed a couple of different times. It happens time and time and time again. China's collapsed. About the only non-collapsed culture I know of are the English, and they've gotten close a couple of times. Certainly America, we had some pretty dark days there in the Civil War, and there were a couple other times where we got pretty close to collapse. So it's not like this is unprecedented in human history. We know it's going to happen. But the question becomes, what's going to happen? There's all kinds of different scenarios out there. The superbug is one of my favorite scenarios. But they run the gamut from the superbug to hidden planets moving through the solar on the opposite side of the sun on our same orbit that we're going to collide with. There's all kinds of creating. There's the Mayan, death whatever in 2012. There was Y2K. There's all kinds of scenarios. But the one you pick, the one you believe in, the one you think is most likely, kind of dictates how you're gonna prepare, what kind of prepper you're gonna be. The popular one right now is the zombie apocalypse. Everyone talks about the zombie apocalypse, where there's going to be some sort of sudden cataclysmic, event that just causes an utter, total collapse where nothing works. Where all form of civil society breaks down in government, and we're all Rick Grimes running through an apocalyptic landscape. That hasn't happened often in history. There's not a lot of historical precedent for us to be able to just throw it all away and run for the hills. Even in the worst of times, the Black Death. So. The Black Death is a special case. Most of Europe collapsed during the Black Death. But even during the Black Death, it wasn't roving bands of individuals running around living as they please. People really kind of banded together and they clanned up. Towns and villages and everything would get together and cooperate, and they would shun those who were sick and everything. But it wasn't every man for himself, even in that, which is. It probably could be considered the worst of times, I would imagine, in history, and that may just be a European perspective. But what are we likely to face today, and how should you prepare for that? Obviously, you can't trust a man sitting in a hole in the bottom of a dirt road at the top of a valley somewhere in the mountains of northeast Georgia. But we can say the zombie apocalypse probably isn't going to come. We can say, nuclear war is not outside the bounds of possibility. I know there's certainly capable actors out there who want to start a nuclear war or some sort of nuclear event. That certainly would be cataclysmic. But you know what? I don't care how much you prep. You're probably not going to be able to prep for a nuclear war. I don't care what you store. If the supervolcano goes off under Yellowstone, yeah, you're probably not. I mean, your prepping's just not going to help. I mean, unless you're just so far away from it, that maybe at least in America, that's going to be hard for that not to survive that. But what do you think is going to happen? What's likely to happen? I know as I look at history, certainly economic collapse is it's a given. It's not even a possibility. It's going to happen. It happens in cycles throughout history. Famine is going to come. There's no way around that. War is going to come. And when economic collapse, famine, and war all hit at the same time, you can certainly have some horrible situations. What are we facing in our world, in America right now, in 2016, in mid-May or late May? We're looking at some very hard economic times in the not too distant future. No one really, even the experts in the Wall Street bulls and everyone, they all pretty much admit that. No one is denying that our economy is set for a correction. The problem is that our population is collapsing. We're aging, and older people don't spend as much money, and older people aren't economic engines. Young people, families, children, these are economic engines. This is what makes an economy dynamic. We don't have that anymore. Our economy is certainly grinding to a halt, and that means that our ability to live this very high lifestyle is grinding to a halt, and that means our ability to afford very high health care costs, to medicate ourselves with all the ways we medicate ourselves with prescription medications and psychiatric drugs and all this stuff. That's all about to grind to a halt. Maybe not catastrophically, maybe not all at once, but in very short order, we're going to find ourselves incapable of affording our drug of choice, whatever that is. And in the meantime, there's still malignant actors out there that are trying to cause as much harm and damage as they can. And eventually they're gonna do it. They're gonna succeed. So what are you preparing for? The zombies aren't coming, but something is. And the worst thing that could come, I'll be honest with you, some sort of cataclysmic event where the government collapsed and civil society crumbled. To me, that's the better option than the more likely option of a total break with our traditional form of government and our freedoms and our Constitution, and the institution of a wildly despotic government. And like I said, this historically is what happens. In the French Revolution, it was that way. The French society collapsed during the Revolution, but they didn't go to lawlessness. Well, they went to lawlessness, but the lawlessness still had the mantle of respectability because it was supposedly done by the government, the new government. In Rome, when they went to despotism, they became despots under this banner of patriotism and nationalism and great civic pride, and the common people were just throwing their freedoms at Julius Caesar because they thought that he was restoring the nation of Rome. Our government is whatever our government is going to look like when this happens is going to be the problem, or will be the greatest threat. Because what's happened time and time again is these great societal upheavals happen. Resources, i.e., food, becomes food and fuel. You saw those in extreme cases in the French Revolution and in the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, where food and fuel became scarce to the point of starvation. People were dying from starvation and hypothermia and stuff because they couldn't warm their houses. They had nothing to cook if they could cook. And so the government nationalized everything and outlawed hoarders. And, the government sanctioned the ransacking of private homes and private property and the confiscation of stored food and stored goods and fuel. For, of course, it's all for the national good. It's all for the good of the people, and it's all only temporary. But the greatest source of misery and death and mayhem and banditry was this government, air quote government, that had given itself the legitimacy of claiming to be government, and people were loath to fight that. There were groups that did. They weren't just, especially in the French Revolution, it wasn't just nobles. There was this whole group of very poor, very rural, uneducated people out in southwestern France who revolted and rose up, and they were very religious, and they were wanting to keep the Catholic Church, which, again, I'm not Catholic. I talk about the Catholic Church a lot, and I'm not Catholic. But the French elite were trying to throw away all religion and be atheists and establish this cult of reason as they gleefully cut everyone's head off. And so they were trying to stamp out the Catholic Church, and these country people kind of rose up and said, no, we're Catholic. We got to die before we give that up. And they mounted a fairly successful campaign for a couple of years, but they ended up getting slaughtered in some pretty horrific ways. And all those enlightened, liberal, elite atheists kind of showed their true colors with some pretty horrific mass killings, gleeful mass killings. So obviously, I'm kind of telling you what I think's coming, but the question not what I think is coming. I may do a detailed video on that because I've got a pretty clear idea of what I think's coming down the pike. But what do you think is coming? What do you need to be prepared for? Do you believe the supervolcano is going to blow up? You've got some prepping to do, some serious prepping. You might want to think about maybe a giant inflatable biodome that can bounce 100 miles in the air. I don't know. I don't know how you prepare for the supervolcano. But if you think someone's attacking us with a dirty bomb, then obviously you need gas masks and biohazard suits, or not biohazard suits, but NBC gear. If you just think the GMOs are going to collapse our food source because we can't grow food anymore, then you need to be storing up heritage variety seeds. It's you got to know what you think's coming, and that's very difficult because none of us are prophets and none of us have crystal balls. So you've got to be able to look at the world around you and say, hey, what is the threat? Some people I respect a lot believe that peak oil is the threat, or some form of peak oil, where very quickly and without warning we won't be able to access oil anymore. Other people think we're going to have an EMP and the grid's going to go down. Whatever it is. But you got to figure out, you look at the world around you and say, hey, what's coming down the pike? What can I prepare for? What should I prepare for? You can't prepare for everything. You wouldn't want to if you could. It would consume your life, and that's not healthy. Life can't be about fear. But, if you've got a family, if you've got friends, if you've got people you love, if you want to contribute something lasting to the world, you got to prepare. Even mainstream people have insurance and savings accounts and backup plans, and we've all seen what can happen even with things like Katrina. We've had the water go out here for a week at a time due to heavy rains. The hurricane that hit New Jersey, earthquakes out west. These things happen. The giant earthquake that hit Haiti is another good example of a society that just ends up in collapse. So what do you think is going to happen? And what are you going to do to prepare for it? All right, thanks, guys.